Namaskar, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I'm Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan recently launched his country's national security policy. Prepared after 7 years of consultations, it is being flaunted as the first policy document with guidelines for achieving national security goals. The policy is divided into 8 sections and places economic security of the country at the core. The other sections talk about national security and cohesion, internal security, defense and territorial integrity, foreign policy and human security. The document is meant for 5 years starting from 2022 and is supposed to be updated by the National Security Division in demanding circumstances that have implications for Pakistan's security. And it can also be updated whenever a new government is formed in the country. On India, Pakistan's national security policy says the country wants to improve its relationship with the neighbor, although it places the Jammu and Kashmir issue as the core of the bilateral relationship. On the show today, we will analyze with an eminent panel of experts the key points of the security policy of Pakistan, what it means for the country, which is currently staring at economic instability, the policy vision on peace with India, and how serious is it on resumption of talks and trade with India. And I'm pleased to welcome on the show today Mr. Arvind Gupta, Director, Vivekananda International Foundation. Mr. Sushant Sareen, he is a Strategic Affairs Analyst and he also works with the ORF. And Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, retired, he is the Director, India Foundation. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on the program today. Mr. Sareen, let me begin the program today with you. Your thoughts on this elaborate policy document unveiled by Pakistan with a lot of hype and fanfare last week. It is indeed an elaborate document covering 8 sections, talking about multiple aspects of security, also foreign policy. Do you find anything new and unique in this national security policy of Pakistan?
In a word, no, because I don't know why you find it very elaborate. Yes, they have collected disparate elements, stuff which has been spoken about very often in the public discourse in Pakistan, and they've collected it all. Now, frankly speaking, all 3 of us work for 3 think tanks, General Katoch, Ambassador Arvind Gupta and myself. And I can assure you that in our think tanks, if we had given a similar task to any of our interns, they could have managed to come up with this kind of a document, not in 7 years, but probably in about a week. So I don't know, what the hullabaloo over this whole document is all about, number one. Number two, there is absolutely nothing new in it. There is no new vision. There is no paradigm shift, which I see in this document. Absolutely no fresh thinking. It's the same old formulations with some new packaging, in keeping with the times, the new jargon of today, geoeconomics and, economic security, human security. Incidentally, the Pakistanis have woken up to the concept of economic and human security and comprehensive national security in the second decade of the 21st century. But this was a concept which was there from around the 70s, 80s of the last century. So maybe they are already 50 years too late coming out with what they think is a new security policy for them. Number 2. Number 3, there is no paradigm shift. For example, on India, is the same old nonsense which the Pakistanis have been spouting for the last 70, 75 years. There is nothing new on that. Yeah. The moment you say that Kashmir will be at the heart of India-Pakistan relations, that's a deal breaker. It's a no-go area. Kashmir being an integral part of India and Pakistan's irredentism simply does not fit in and is not conducive to any kind of good relations. And if they think that by making peace hostage, they will be better off, then they've tried it for 75 years. They can try it for another 75, no skin of India's nose. And finally, on the issue of, you say, actually, you don't say, you've just said what they've said, that it's going to be for the next 5 years and all of that. But I think this document will be thrown into the rubbish bin as soon as Imran Khan's government goes into the rubbish bin. I think the opposition and the main opposition parties have already rejected this document. It is not a consensus document. So, frankly, I don't really find any merit or nothing to commend this particular policy document.
Okay. Mr. Gupta, what are your thoughts? Do you agree with Mr. Sareen that there is a lot of hullabaloo, but there's nothing, no concrete vision as far as security is concerned, and also no change in stance as far as relations with India are concerned? So just a mere eyewash for the global fraternity, or actually a change of heart looking at the ground situation?
I think Mr. Sushant Sareen has very nicely summarized the policy and its intent. I don't think there is much new in this policy insofar as India is concerned, or the approach, integrated approach, holistic approach to national security, etc. is concerned. All the concepts are very well known, and they have been talked about by many countries in many contexts and so on. But I think we also need to look at this policy in a slightly different light, and which is that it is now an official document. And in some sense, if you have to find what is wrong with today's Pakistan, you can find it from this document. So to that extent, it's a candid admission which is now being projected, being put forward in a official document. So that is something I think which is new, because it talks about the ills of the Pakistan society, the ills of its economy, though the analysis is, of course, quite broad and not very detailed, but that is not the purpose of the policy also. So I think that was something that I found interesting in this document. The second is, the policy is not meant for India. The policy is meant for the rest of the world.
Yes.
And it's a very clever move by the Pakistani Imran Khan government to project to the world how progressive modern Pakistan is, and how it is now repositioning Pakistan as a geo-economic hub, etc. So there may be many takers around the world of this policy, and because the Pakistanis, I'm sure, will now follow it up with a lot of effort to promote this, and this will become a talking point in every high-level discussion, seminars, and so on and so forth. So the policy is aimed at it's a PR exercise to correct the image of the country which is seen as a terrorist-infested country, Pakistan as a supporter of terrorism, etc. And this has done a lot of damage to Pakistan. For instance, the FATF issue. So I think this is an effort in that direction. I don't think the word will be taken in, but nevertheless, that is an effort in that direction.
Okay.
And one more point, and which I think Sushant also mentioned, it is deeply hostile to India. In fact, the kind of words that have been used, Hindutva-driven politics has impacted Pakistan's security, or the Indian armed forces are carrying out human rights violations or genocide. I mean, these are more or less the kind of words that have been used, and all the blame for the sorry state of bilateral relations has been put on India.
Absolutely.
So if they're hoping that India will be taken in by this policy, they are sadly mistaken. So I think that is how I look at it.
Okay. Major General Katoj, coming to you for your perspective, how do you look at the entire, or since the policy has been launched, there have been proponents on both sides saying how India should appreciate Pakistan's stance on resumption of trade and talks with Pakistan, and that India should give a chance once again. But do you agree with what Ambassador Gupta says, that it is actually not meant for India? It is to showcase to the world that the onus now lies on India to resume talks. And should India actually be falling for it?
I think Ambassador Gupta has summed it up very nicely, and so has Mr. Sareen earlier. You see, the way I have looked at this whole thing is, one thing which I will grant to the Pakistanis, and I've always granted it to them, is their use of the language. They use very flowery language, which is designed to deceive the world. So here they've come out with a security document, a national security document, and they are trying to show a very progressive image to everybody around them. But actually, once you go a little bit deeper into what exactly has been written, uh, everything I feel is contradictory in terms. One, in the preamble itself, in the opening, they have actually made the statement that we will preserve the Islamic character of the country. At the same breath, they are saying we will be equal to all religious groups. Now, this is the contradiction in terms. You can't do that. If you have Islamic law, then the rights of other religious groups are impacted. Now, so these are the continuous statements which they have made. Now, on economy, they have made a statement, we want to have friendly relations with India. Now, I can understand that because Pakistan, the core of their policy, what they're talking about here, the very core they're saying is economics. And out of it, only if they are strong economically can everything else flow. Now, it stands to reason if Pakistan has to get out of the economic mess it is in, it has to have friendly relations with India. If India and Pakistan are not on friendly terms, Pakistan will remain in the backwaters as far as the economy is concerned. Now, see what they say about India after saying that we want friendly relations. The words which they have used is a conventional military threat from a country with regressive and dangerous ideology. Now, Pakistan is actually the only country in the world with a regressive and dangerous ideology is Pakistan. And they're using those words for India. Then their statements on Jammu and Kashmir. So obviously it doesn't ratchet, it doesn't really gel. As far as I'm concerned, India is willing to have friendly relations with Pakistan. We are willing to go the extra mile. But Pakistan has to do only one thing. They have to stop cross-border terrorism and hand over the terrorists which India has been demanding back to India for trial. Now, that will be the test for Pakistan if they desire peace or not. And I don't see that happening. So I think Pakistan is going to remain in very deep trouble. This policy document is in my view, it is a total whitewash. It's an eyewash. It is meant for perhaps their own public opinion. It is perhaps meant to influence certain parties in the West. Perhaps it is meant to influence China, the United Nations. That time will tell. But ultimately, the proof of the pudding lies in the eating. Absolutely. So what is going to happen now? You have a document and you have to implement the document because having a document and simply filing it is meaningless. So how are they going to implement this document? Now, there are certain confidential pages which they have got, which we don't have access to. But you see that it doesn't really matter whether we have access to them or not. There is no way in which Pakistan can get its economy up. There is no way in which they can achieve a rapprochement with India unless they compromise on their own foreign policy interests, which simply state that they're using terrorism as an instrument of foreign policy. Are they willing to compromise on that? So if you're not willing to compromise on your foreign policy interests, if you're not willing to compromise on what you perceive to be your security interests, then I'm afraid there is no way in which we can go further.
Absolutely.
So
Ambassador Gupta, very important point that Major General made is having a policy document is one thing. The key lies in its implementation now.
Yes.
Now, there is a lot of rhetoric, a lot of wishful thinking in the policy document that may appease to countries, to the United Nations as well. But how to make it work is going to be the next big step. Is there a roadmap in the policy that talks about how to implement it going ahead?
A policy document which is an abbreviated form of a larger and a bigger document, which is probably 120 pages or so. So there may be some roadmap there. There's some very sketchy kind of mention as to how to go about saying that the policy needs to be implemented through a whole of government approach, that there should be a better coordination, etc., which is neither here nor there. So the policy, the public draft or the public version of it lacks that roadmap. And implementation, in fact, the policy itself accepts that implementation is going to be a problem. And it exhorts the government departments and the government generally to adopt a whole of government approach. And is not very sure whether that will happen or no. And that is why it also says that the policy can be reviewed and changed if the government, etc., changes. So I don't think there is any roadmap. It is pure and simple a document which is aimed at convincing the world that Pakistan is a well-intentioned country, and it is a progressive country, and it is talking about economic security, and that is at the heart of it. But its main problem is with India. And there it is, I think there's nothing that has changed. In fact, I would say that the policy is very hard on India, and particularly when it mentions Jammu and Kashmir and the Indian armed forces and the government ideology, India's ideology, etc.
Absolutely. 14 times it mentions India, and just one positive aspect about how it just wants to improve relationship. At all the other mentions, there is just a hardened stance on the country's ideology, on the kind of security threats in the Indian Ocean. And that, of course, is something that we have seen earlier as well. Mr. Sareen, one interesting aspect, and of which Ambassador Gupta also spoke about earlier, was how they want to prioritize geo-economics vis-a-vis geopolitics. What is this whole geo-economics pitch that Pakistan wants to showcase to the world, and the emphasis of this shift from geopolitics to geoeconomics?
Look, that's a pro forma statement. Do you expect a government, even if it is Pakistan, a rogue state like Pakistan, do you expect a government of that place to come out with a document in which they clearly state that no, India is the eternal enemy and we will fight it for 1,000 years? That's not going to happen in this day and age, especially as when Dr. Gupta says that this is essentially an image building exercise. Who seem to be extremely enthused by just this one sentence. Now, frankly, that level of obtuseness escapes me. But to come back to the main question, General Katoch was talking about they writing a regressive and dangerous ideology. I thought if that did not fit ideally on Pakistan, that fit ideally on its client state, Afghanistan. But where else in the world is there a more regressive and dangerous ideology than in Afghanistan, which also poses a conventional and subconventional threat to not just Pakistan, not just Afghanistan, but rest of the region. But that they have glossed over. Then you come to this whole question of, geoeconomics. Look, even on geoeconomics, 6 months back, they were saying geoeconomics is now the way forward. And then from the usual dinosaurs from the retired army men community, ex-servicemen community, there was a pushback. So now they have nuanced that position. They have talked about geoeconomics, but they said that essentially it is all about geostrategy, and geoeconomics becomes an essential component of geostrategy. So one, they have watered down that whole concept of geoeconomics. Number two, both on geoeconomics as well as on, when they say that economics is going to be at the core of national security, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So for example, their formulations on what they need to do on the economy are pedestrian. They are like a class 12 economics textbook prescriptions they have given. Nothing more than that. Look, they say you have to show fiscal responsibility. Now, if this is some kind of a great economic epiphany which the Pakistanis have come up, that there has to be fiscal responsibility, that you have to manage your resources very well. This is like, things like motherhood and apple pie is good for everybody. If those are the formulations which you have, then you have absolutely no idea in mind on how to go forward. So if you're saying we have to show fiscal responsibility, how? What are you going to do about it? How are you going to cut your expenses? How are you going to cut upon the wasteful expenses where the Prime Minister of the country flies from his farmhouse, which he does not earn enough money to pay for the upkeep, and he has his cronies paying for it. Incidentally, he talks about rule of law and all of that. And he flies at 55 rupees a kilometer helicopter fuel costs him. But he's probably the cheapest helicopter flight in the world. When you have people like that, how are you going to cut down on fiscal deficit? How are you going to cut down on the wasteful expenditure? How are you going to reform your public sector undertakings which are bleeding the country? How are you going to do any of those things? There's absolutely no clarity on that. Then you come on to geoeconomics. You talk about becoming a bridge between South Asia and Central Asia and Middle East and North Asia or China. Bridge to what? You have severed all links with India. So if you're talking about South Asia, India is South Asia. If you remove India from South Asia, there is no South Asia left. So what bridge are you going to be, and a bridge to what, from where? You keep talking about connectivity projects through what? Afghanistan is a connectivity to what? And to what end? What are going to be the products which are going to be exchanged? What is going to be the trade patterns? What are going to be the composition of trade, the direction of trade? There is absolutely no clarity on that. And I very much doubt, and I'm willing to bet my last dollar on it, that even in that so-called classified portion, there would be absolutely zero clarity on the questions which I'm raising.
Okay. Major General, so obviously lots of significant points, particularly when it comes to stands on India. But if we look at the other countries, how does Pakistan's policy document spell their relations with countries like the United States, with the UK, with the European countries, and how to take them forward? Particularly because we see, since the Biden administration has taken charge in the United States, the relations between the United States and Pakistan have not been on that kind of upswing that Pakistan would have expected. So do you see a change in the kind of relations as far as the United States and Pakistan is concerned?
I think Pakistan will certainly aim to improve its relations with the United States, and the policy document also states so. But they are running into major difficulties. You see, they are running into difficulties as to how to balance their relations with China, how to balance their relations with the US. What are they going to do about the Gulf countries? Because now even Saudi Arabia and the Emirates aren't that friendly to Pakistan as they used to be. Yes, Turkey is friendly with them, and China is very friendly with them. But neither of these two countries are going to finance them. The only countries which can finance them is the European Union and the United States. And I'm not sure if any of those two countries wish to go on that path as of now. They may change their stance later. So from Pakistan's perspective, they would certainly like to have a rapprochement all around. But I really don't think it's going to work, because centrally it has to be based on India. And unless you base your policy on India, if you're looking at economy as the core of the policy, which is going to drive everything else, then they have to be friendly with India. And if they have to be friendly with India, they have to stop terrorism. Now, I'm afraid they can't do that. If they stop terrorism, there will be internal troubles within Pakistan. They will implode.
Yes.
So I think they are also caught in a catch-22 situation. Security-wise, I do not see the Pakistani establishment changing course on its own security dilemmas. On foreign policy, most certainly they will try to get close to the US, but this time I think the US is going to be a bit cautious, especially in giving money, because their interests have changed. Even when this Afghanistan imbroglio was going on from mid-August onwards last year till now, and the Americans withdrew, I think even that time I was quite certain that the Americans are simply getting out because they know this region will be in turmoil and somebody else has to now pick up the tab. So if the Americans are already planning that somebody else will pick up the tab, then why should they foot the bill now? It doesn't serve their strategic interests anymore. So Pakistan, in my view, is going to run into much deeper trouble. They have a policy document, yes. How to implement it will remain the million-dollar question. And in my view, it is not implementable because there are internal contradictions within the document which make it a non-starter right Absolutely. From the word go.
So for the moment, it just looks like a mere eyewash to appease the international community, particularly geared up for the international audience, the United Nations, to secure kind of a bailout that they have been looking at following the ground situation, the battered economy at the moment. So with that, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of Perspective. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on the program today, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. It was a pleasure having you on the program. So that's it from us on this edition of Perspective. Thanks very much to all our viewers as well for their time.